Hello. Uh, I guess by the title of the video, you can probably tell what's going to be talked about here. There's no real need to preface it with anything. I have two or three basic questions and ideas that I'm going to talk about in as quickly a time period as possible. But first, I want to start out by saying I do not hate America, I do not hate Israel, and I'm not anti Semitic. I simply am someone who, my entire life, has always wanted to know the facts, even if it meant being in opposition with the majority of those around me. It's been my entire existence at this point. It's just been ongoing digging and searching and trying to find the truth in what I would, in a PG sense, call a wave of trash, of misinformation and lies. So today I'm going to be discussing Israel and Palestine and the United States. A lot of my information comes from different academic scholars who I'm sure I will talk about in the future more at length, my influences and whatnot. A lot of reading and a lot of information. Uh, to give my own background, I have a master's degree in social work, my undergraduate focusing on policy, my master's focusing on mental health, and I'm currently in year one of my PhD program. I am also enrolled in a master's program for political science. That being said, you do not need a firm educational background or to be well read to understand or talk about these issues that we're going to talk about today or at any other case. Really, it's just the idea that those who are more educated and more articulated in certain issues are the ones we should be listening to and the ones that we should get most of our ideas from. The United States has a very poor track record of taking intellectual ideas seriously, but that's not what we're here to discuss. The first thing I have on my list is why the United States supports Israel, and I'm also going to answer how they've been supporting Israel. And the first question can be answered in two different ways, three really. The first basic answer is that the United States has a very well maintained interest in the Middle East region since the post World War II period, honestly, probably before that. The United States uses Israel as a firm base of these operations and keeping an eye on and maintaining control of their region to some extent or another. This is proven through various different means over the years. One of them was back in the early 2010s during one of Israel's mowing the lawn phases, which we'll talk about in a second. Israel ran out of munitions, was getting very low, and needed more, but they needed them in a hurry. And the United States couldn't, of course, get the bill passed and then, of course, fly the weapons over. So the Israeli government, the IDF, their military force there, the Israeli government's military force, the IDF, just to clarify, went into a private stash of munitions that is in a military base by the United States, and they are able to get a hold of those. This, while we're talking about weapons, we might as well get this point across. Oftentimes, the news will say that the Israelis are using their helicopters or their weapons or their planes to bomb several places. Currently, is the Gaza Strip and Lebanon. This is partially factually inaccurate because while it is Israeli soldiers and Israeli personnel manning these aircraft and manning the weapons, it is United States military equipment that they are using. These are all, of course, paid for by United States dollars and so on. The second thing that you have to talk about is the idea of Zionism. Now, we're not going to get into a very firm or deep definition of the ideologies or the talks about it. But I will say that Christian Zionism in the United States is much stronger than any idea of Jewish Zionism. and going all the way back to President Harry Truman before that as well. But even as recently as George W. Bush was very, very Christian and very Christian Zionist, to the point of when explaining his ideas, he often did quote the Bible's ideas about Israel and the end times. There is a excerpt in which George W. Bush was talking to French President Chirac and described archangels coming down at the end times to destroy Israel as apparently a reason for good. I'll have that linked in the description for you so you can look into it yourself. It's an interesting story to say the least. The U.S. mainly supports Israel since by sending weapons. They send weapon packages pretty much every couple of months or so. Lately, because of the war, it's been more frequent. They send their most advanced technology for killing that you can possibly think of to the Israeli government to then use in their ongoing actions. The other way United States supports is by offering defense. We saw earlier this year them blocking rockets and missiles sent from Iran, and so on. The other way the United States mainly supports Israel is by blocking United Nations resolutions. This goes back before this, but the main one is 1976, when there was a resolution in the UN to have a two-state settlement. That was the international consensus at that point. It still is to this day, and the United States vetoed it. They blocked it in its entirety. Up until recent years, it's been really hard to find the documents stating this, but now there's an entire Wikipedia page, and of course I'll have it linked in the description for you. But since then, the United States has blocked, just too many to count, vetoes of the UN resolutions. I'll have a description link once again full of all of them, but these go from basic humanitarian issues to even violating the United States' own stance on things. Before 2019, the United States saw the settlements in Gaza and the Palestinian land as illegal. But in 2011, when the United Nations voted to make them illegal by international law, the United States went forward to block it, violating their own principles just to support Israel. These are ongoing ways the United States government has come back to Israel. In fact, it is argued very heavily so, and it's quite frankly close enough to fact to say that without the United States support for Israel, there would be a different concept of the Israel-Palestine conflict as it is right now. There would be different views of it, and so on. It also is very clear that the United States media very firmly backs Israel there and its ideologies. Anytime you can look into it, anytime I'll have different links of examples of this in the description too, because there's been a few blatant ones in the recent months. But the United States really leans into, because the media in the United States, and we'll talk about this later, you can look into manufacturing consent if you like, that the United States media primarily gets its information from the United States government, and if the United States government supports something, that's how the media reports it. There are, of course, differences in this, and you can see some anomalies, but for the most part, this is how it is. And so the media supports Israel, and so other people support Israel. The United States citizens do. There's an ongoing movement, specifically amongst young people. There has always been some movement with older generation, of course, the Peace Corporation, a lot of the academics I'll mention, but it has never been as popular as it is right now. You can ask certain individuals about trying to go talk at colleges and immediately pretty much being given death threats and having to be police escorted just to their cars, even at schools they worked at. The next thing we'll talk about are the myths about the ongoing war, things that are being said and perpetrated by different people. The one that, a lot of people ask is, why do the Palestinians hate the Israeli government and the Israeli people. Now, of course, there is always animosity between different religions, but the Palestinians as a whole just want to live in peace like anybody else does. And for the last 50 more years, they've been subject to conditions and treatment by the Israeli government that is, as previously mentioned, humanitarian violations on a scale greater than what anyone can really think of. The Gaza Strip has been known to be a terrible place where people are suffering. Right now, it's even worse because of the ongoing bombing and onslaught. But it goes beyond the ideas of hate and wanting to destroy. It goes into the idea of people just wanting to live in peace and be recognized as human beings. But that is something that hasn't happened for 50 years, and it's been supported by the United States government. And without the United States government support, it wouldn't be as ongoing as it is. There's been other myths about the war. The one that is often repeated by the Israeli government whenever they bomb a hospital and they kill 13 children is that the terrorist Hamas are hiding weapons of mass destruction in these buildings, in these hospitals, or that they're using human shields. There's never been any proof of this. This has been something the Israeli government has been going on forever about. The United Nations has condemned this. Amnesty International has condemned this. Human Rights Watch has condemned it. It has been an ongoing violation and war crime of international law that is supported by the United States, so it's going to continue to happen. In fact, if you look at the idea of Hamas hiding weapons in buildings where civilians are using human shields, you can go back to my knowledge as far as the Vietnam War, the United States invasion of Vietnam, to see that this has been a myth perpetuated, ongoing for forever. That the enemy is using human shields. The enemy is hiding their buildings in homes and hospitals. So we have to bomb them. We have to kill these civilians in order to kill the quote-unquote bad guys. It's disgusting, quite frankly, and it breaks your heart whenever you see the reports. Recently, the New York Times ran an op-ed by surgeons who had been, and doctors signed on as well, who had been in the Gaza Strip trying to perform medical services. And you can look at Israel's history of killing United Nations workers, journalists, American citizens, and of course, health workers. I'll add links for those in the description. They'll probably just be the more recent ones, but they go back decades. But this op-ed by these surgeons, this main surgeon who wrote it, described how everywhere in Gaza that is currently treating people get children brought to them who have been shot in the head or the chest by the Israeli forces. Immediately upon this op-ed being released were backlash saying that these pictures were fakes or that Hamas was the perpetrator in an attempt to generate outrage. But when looking at the caliber of bullet and matching it to the caliber that is sold to the Israeli government, as well as the New York Times editor of the op-ed pieces coming out themselves and saying, no, the pictures of the children's dead was too graphic to show. And that's something that bothers me to a ton, that people really consider the idea that dead children are being used as a political statement, as opposed to what it really is, and just the indiscriminate killing of civilians of war, mainly children, people who are just, once again, children are children. You shouldn't have to try to come up with an excuse to kill a child. It's just terrible. The last little thing I'm going to discuss here, because I've gone longer than I wanted to, is the two-state solution. The two-state solution, again, mentioned going back to the United Nations resolution that was vetoed by the United States, has been an international consistent since then. Palestine, the rest of the world, only two nations. Sometimes it's other proxies of the United States reject it too, but mostly just the United States and Israel have rejected the two-state solution in every sense. During the 2002 negotiations, 2000 to 2002 negotiations between Palestine and Israel, it was the closest in modern history we have come to having a two-state solution enacted. It was left on the table by Israel and the United States, and of course immediately, as has been always been the case, and it's always been a lie. The United States and Israel both said it was the Palestinians' fault for not agreeing to it. But when looking into the actual negotiations, what people said while they were there, going all the way back to the Camp David Accords of '79 and now the Camp David Accords of 2000, and it's just strictly this: the United States and Israel always block any movement towards an actual peaceful idea. Arafat, the Palestinian president of National Authority, was a member of these negotiations, and he has gone on public record saying we accepted it. And the Israeli government even said, talking about the 2000 Camp David Accords afterwards, when the negotiations were as close as ever, the Israeli government had an election, and they said that the ideas given by the new negotiations were no longer something they were willing to consider. And that's just how it goes back and forth from history. The United States and Israel simply, for one reason or the other, don't really want peace in Palestine. And we can talk about, the history of the last several decades. We can talk about mowing of the lawn. I'll put it in the description. Maybe I'll make a follow-up video to this one. But the main idea is this, and that is, in order for there to be the first step for peace amongst Israel and Palestine, and quite frankly a lot more of the Middle East, the United States needs to withdraw its resources and support for Israel and actually start working towards a peaceful settlement. That is as clear as it is. I don't know if it will ever happen. I do know there's ways you can support. My main way of supporting, and I hope that you will also join me in supporting, is the United States Campaign for Palestinian Rights. You can donate. They make generated emails for your representatives, so you can send it to them. Or they also have a list of protests that you can go take part of, fundraisers for Palestinian rights, that sort of thing. I hope that you'll click on the links in the description and learn more. I also hope you'll donate and support the Palestinian Campaign for Human Rights too, as I have. If you just want to match what I give $10 every month. It's not very much, but it's something. And I think that they'll take anything they can get, as we all can give, and hopefully it'll make a difference. Thank you so much for watching this little clip, or honestly probably listening to it. I don't know when the next I'm gonna upload, but I know it's probably gonna be a doozy. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.